Hello everyone, thank you for coming. My name is Alessandra Capodacqua and I'm professor of photography here at NYU. And I have invited Rocco Rorandelli together with Professor Scott Palmer in a conjoint adventure in having also a workshop here for tomorrow. Rocco Rorandelli, the photographer we have invited, is the third time here at NYU, is our popular lecturer. And he's a documentary photographer who has studied zoology. And this is quite interesting, I think, because this gives you the perspective on how his focus is based on his studies and also his deep interest in environmental issues and global society. So his images have been published in many magazines, books, and I don't mention that, but you can read them on the projection. And he's been awarded a grant by the Fund for Investigative Journalism for his long-term project on the tobacco industry. Rocco is based in Rome and is founding member of the Terra Project Collective of Photography. And I leave the floor to Rocco and welcome him with a warm applause. Thank you.
Thanks, Alessandra. Hi, everybody. Thank you also, Scott, for inviting me. It's always a pleasure to be here. And tonight I want to talk about my work, naturally, which in the last few years has been concentrating specifically on one issue, which is migration, and somehow in a specific region, which is in the Balkans. But at the same time, I want this to be a little of an insight on how projects sometimes stem from different inputs. So I might have, I might steer towards a specific direction, thinking, I want to concentrate and focus on migration in the next few years, but at the same time, because of a fragment of a conversation or just sheer curiosity, I might find myself working on a different topic as well. Because I think as being a documentary photographer, naturally there is an interest in trying to communicate, and sometimes you feel there are some topics which probably more urgent and you feel more passionate in doing it and working on them. I will show you a few projects that I've been working on in the last few years. And I'll start from the one that I presented the last time I was here at NYU. Most of you were not here probably, so it shouldn't be too boring. At the end of 2015, I decided to follow the migration route that was going from Greece up to Germany, when an informal set of humanitarian corridors were opened across different countries in the Balkans. In those days, what was happening, if you recall, there were around 6,000 people that every day were arriving on the Greek islands, and then from there made their way to Thessaloniki and then Athens, and then move north towards Austria and Germany. And most photographers were working on the arrivals of these little inflatable boats on the shores of the islands, because actually they were the most dramatic images, and there were people naturally drowning, and what was happening there also was probably the reason why the German government decided to open up the borders to especially the Syrians at the beginning, a general crowd, and then only the Syrians. So I also wanted to go because, again, I felt that it was an important matter, but I also had to face the reality that most magazines that I work with were not interested in another photographer doing the same things. That was the general perception that I had. And so I just waited and tried to figure out what to do when I noticed how the general debate started to focus on how to discriminate between this flux of migrants. So we started talking about economic migrants, asylum seekers and refugees. So creating classes of people who could enter and could not enter Germany. So somehow this clicked in my mind that I could work more on a general concept of migration as a pattern and as a natural movement of people without concentrating too much on who these people were and where they were coming from. And so I started working on with a drone camera, taking aerials of this movement of masses. Here it's buses coming from Athens on the border with Macedonia. And there was a UNHCR camp in Idomeni, and this was the line of people entering the camp. They were just collecting some meals, and then they would just leave, moving towards Macedonia. And most of the movements was done either by buses or cars or trains. So I could find and photograph people crossing the borders only on the borders themselves. So my travel was mostly jumping from, for example, the southern border of Macedonia with Greece to the northern border between Macedonia and Serbia, and then from Serbia, between Serbia and Croatia, etc. No? And that's where I was focusing, I was working. So, and this was also the first time that I was taking aerial, so probably I was lacking some stylistic homogeneity. It was like an experiment, okay? But what I noticed immediately was that it's true that you don't, that I was trying to get away from the single individual and work more on the groups and the masses. At the same time, what I was looking for when I was taking these photos and editing them in the evening was that if someone was looking at the drone, there would be an interesting element, the face of a kid or a gesture. So although I was trying to be far, my attention was still on the individual identity, which could also be expressed through a bag or the color of a jacket. But still, there was this kind of clash between trying to be far and objective and still looking for a more subjective approach. Here, this is the no man's land between Serbia and Macedonia. And here it's the road that goes towards Preševo, in the first town of Serbia. Here in the, this was a park where some tents in Belgrade. In Belgrade there were two parks. One was called the Afghan Park because most Afghanis, and the other one was called the Syrian Park, where most Syrians were camping. But this was towards the end of the phenomenon. That's when people were not stopping by the center anymore. And this was a town called Babska on the border between Serbia and Croatia. So people were arriving with their buses and collecting some food items or clothing, and then continue their travel towards Croatia. And this was the entrance. This town is called Spilfield, on the border between Austria and Slovenia. And so let's say who is here is kind of, or who was reaching this camp was going to enter in the program of being deployed then into Germany, and then in an organized manner divided between towns, etc. And here it was interesting how people were mostly resting on what I had seen until then was people trying to move and cross, and here instead, either because it was more like organized setting. It was dry, it was on a concrete pavement, but people were down, resting and spending maybe a few days before continuing. At the same time, okay, this, for example, was the head of this camp who was giving an interview. So there was already this element of being in the eye of the media. So anyway, these were all glimpses that I was collecting with my drone, and then finally in Freelassing on the border between Germany and Austria, people were entering into Germany. And also you see how the size of the groups were becoming smaller because they were allowed less number of people to cross. And finally were put on the bus, etc. I went back to the same town that I was telling you about, Idomeni, on the border between Greece and Macedonia. I went back a few months later, in 2016, spring, because that's when a very different setting was organized. The borders were closed. And so I couldn't see people anymore crossing. I could see tents. And I went there because first I was given an assignment by Doctors Without Borders to follow some of their activities. And then I wanted to continue. I didn't know precisely how I wanted to continue my work. And because when you think of Greece, you always think of like a nice holiday setting. I took some of these photos, so from aerials of camps. But then I also did a kind of an opposite work. I went to look for specifically the people, and I asked these people what objects they had with themselves and that reminded them of the country that they left. So mostly I photographed Kurds from Iraq and people from Syria who were in either kind of formal camps like this one or informal camps in the woods. And they showed me some of these objects. These are not great photos, but I'm showing them to you because they kind of represent let's say, an embryo of another work that I completed last year on objects. So I made this set of photos, and I called them postcards from Greece, and they were like portraits of families, and then they would take out some items. Each item had a story, naturally. This was the phone. It's not just the phone. Inside the phone memory, there were like the last images that this family have taken out of their own house, which later they knew that had been destroyed. So they were showing me these videos, or like the woman was holding in her purse one lipstick. And this another family from Syria. He was an electrician. She was an English teacher, so it was easier to communicate than others. And they had like a little handkerchief with some hair from the sister of the woman who she had not been able to leave Syria. So each item had a very strong story. This was a scarf that one of these guys had received from the fiancé, and also the fiancé had stayed back. And this the photo of the father of one of those younger men, and the father had been killed. And here you see the complete family around the grandmother and all a set of kids. And one of the men, he had a jewelry store, and this was the only object that he was able to take out, and it was the watch that he was wearing. And actually, for most of them, SIM cards with all the phone numbers, and that was important. And also found this very interesting, like around the rosary you can find also like a memory stick which probably contains something very important, documents or images. While I was in in Serbia, I was given, a lot of people work, like, apart from the big organizations, when you go into these places, you find a lot of volunteers, small organizations, group of people that kind of self-organize themselves, and they try to help. Some do well, in the sense, sometimes, it's very naive what we might think it's good to do, but you go there and probably, you go there with a car full of medicines, but maybe those medicines are not really useful. So sometimes, all these organizations try to coordinate or to collect funds and go through an NGO. But some people do interesting things. So, for example, there was this group of young kids from Spain and Italy, and they were giving out some pamphlets, and they were explaining that the borders between Serbia and Macedonia was littered with landmines. So I found it very strange that, so close to my own country, there are landmines, and it's something that, remained in the back of my mind. So after I came back, I started reading more about it, and so in the same year, in 2016, and then for 2 years, I started this project about landmines in the Balkans. So today, in the world, there are around 60 countries which are littered with unexploded remnants of war, and each year a few thousand people get injured by the explosion of these landmines, cluster bombs, etc. If I show you this list, and I'll tell you some of these, or which of these countries you think have a massive contamination by landmines. And massive contamination landmines is defined when in a country there is an area with more than 100 square kilometers of landmines. Which you think fit in this definition and which probably don't? Ideas? Afghanistan, I say probably yes. Angola? Cambodia, okay. Okay, good. Then? Yeah, so actually all these countries are heavily contaminated. So they have an area with more than 100 square meters of landmines. And what is interesting is that I might expect it from some of them, but not from Croatia probably, which is part of the European Union, or Bosnia. Instead, Bosnia and Croatia unfortunately have a big number of mines. I visited Bosnia, Croatia, and Kosovo, which is not a country for some, and for some it is. Because it unilaterally sought independence from Serbia, but it's not accepted by all governments. Bosnia is the most heavily mined country of the three. It had something like 80,000 mines, still littered in an area of 1,000 square kilometers. So this is a huge area. If I show you the map, so this is Bosnia Herzegovina, and Sarajevo is right here. So that's the capital city. You see on the mountains around Sarajevo, it's still full of mines, and the mines naturally are mostly around the borders. In Croatia has around 400 square kilometers of landmines, and around 100 square kilometers of other munition which were left there during the Croatian independence war. And Croatia has a lot of funds coming from Europe to remove these landmines, but this has been done from like around Split, probably it's all clean on the coastal areas where most tourists go, but on the hills and mountains you still have a big amount of. And then Kosovo has small areas, Landmines are very less, but they have a lot of problems with the cluster munition. Cluster bombs are this group of bombs that are released by airplanes and which are supposed to detonate on objects such as maybe an army outpost or a tank. But like around 30% of these small bombs inside the mother bomb don't explode, and they remain in the soil, and they can be activated by either landmines that explode in the vicinity or by a person. So I worked on different levels visually. I visited these countries, and I wanted to photograph the minefields which are under demining. So the idea is to see how the mining is done, but also to show what is the kind of land which we subtract from a state or a country when this is mined. So you will see a lot of these lines. These are all safety corridors that are created by the miners. So this is all clean, let's say, and these are all areas which are still to be decontaminated. And then my work was also to identify some of the victims, and they would tell me stories. In this case, for example, he's a 30-year-old boy. He lost his leg. This is Kosovo. Soon after the war, when he came back from Albania, and just around the house, he stepped on a mine. And then another set of images is objects. This is land which has been released, and this is still mined. Most of these people really receive a very small pension, around, for them in this case, this guy is from Croatia, he receives around 100 euros pension, but each prosthetic leg can cost between 2,000, a good one, between 2,000 and 6,000 euros. This is a fragment of an exploded mine, so this object I collected from the fields. This gives you an idea of what is the extent of the work that the miner has to do. So he is opening up this area, okay? So as he goes ahead, he slowly cleans the bushes. And this is in an area which has been demined by machine. So you can use machine, you can use dogs, but then at the end, you still need to be 100% sure that you demine totally the area. You need the probing of the deminer who has to probe, inch by inch, the area. And naturally, every year there are accidents, as you can imagine. She lost her leg in 2001, so way after the end of the war. Here we are in Bosnia, and she's a teacher, and she was walking through a path which she said she used to walk through every day, and that day she stepped on a mine. And this is something that that you can hear over and over when you talk to victims, that they were in a place that they have been familiar with for many years, and it never happened. He is part of a sitting volley, it's called Phantom, one of the two sitting volley teams of Sarajevo in Bosnia. And he also participated to the Paralympic Games, both in London and Rio. In London he won with his team the gold, in Rio the silver. Bosnia is one of the best sitting volley team. A sitting volley includes both people that lost their limbs, the legs, or even people with legs, but they have to play sitting. And there's a number, like max, I think 2 with legs, with both legs, let's say. And the game is played like normal volley, but just moving with your hands and, let's say, on the floor. In this case, it was very interesting because all this, like, being a victim of war and losing a limb, it means a lot negatively, naturally, because you're not, it's a stigma socially, but also you usually lose your job. And you saw the pensions are very low. Although the cost of life in these countries can be, it's lower than here naturally, but still you have cures and you have to maintain your own, you have to have periodically being checked, etc. So those who find a way to go on, and this could be also a sport, you find them much more strong and as individuals that have a much more positive attitude towards life. This is a demining machine. It's like a huge tank with this chains that move and hit the soil. But again, a demining machine, it's not 100% proof. So you still have to then demine by hand. He's a skier. And this instead, it's a different kind of sensor radar that they're using. It's a huge radar that they're using to find cluster bombs. And this, as you can see, it's in a plain. It's in the plains. It's not in the forest area, and it was very close to the road. So this was a place which had been, while they were building a factory, they were digging with a tractor and they found a box, and so with the cluster bombs, and so they had to clear or let's say probe the whole area around it. He's a deminer who lost his leg during a demining operation, and that's when he discovered that his company never insured him, so he had not been receiving any paying or insurance for the accident that he had on the spot. Okay, if you have any questions, ask me. Yeah. With that?
I saw one of the photos, I think it's
with smoke, yeah.
The smoke, was that,
Yeah, actually, you see here, we are inside a mine area, and here they were exploding a few mines that they had collected. So that's what they usually do. They collect them, put them together, and then they explode them. My latest personal project often include air reviews. I'm still debating how this should enter the narrative and the visuals. So I'm also showing you some, like, the evolution of this vision that I'm having of aerials that, in this case, for me, like, this view renders a minefield more abstract. I don't know, this looks like a flag, maybe. And so it makes me think of the relationship that a cornfield, half demined, has with the geopolitical aspects. So I'm not saying that aerials are by default right or strong, but I tend to think that they're effective in some of these essays. I'm still trying to work out, and I'll show you like my latest work, and hopefully that will clear up also. And maybe you can also tell me if it's effective or not. When you are working with the media, you also have to think what is more effective in gaining the attention from the audience. And naturally, the audience, you start with the photo editor that you interact with, but the photo editor also has to interact with the editor, and the editor has to think if the readers will like it, right? So certain topics that have been over-represented, if you offer a fresh look, okay, you might get some more attention. And this is something that is important to bear in mind. Then you might say, well, I prefer to be my own audience. I prefer to work for myself and be strong on my visual mission. And that's fine and legit. But if you also try to sell your work, if you try to publish it, you also have to, or at least I think it's important to open up and experiment. For example, I haven't worked with that yet, but I'm thinking, the 360 degrees immersive VR, it's something that it's basically becoming more popular because our audience is less of readers and it's more of image consumers, which use a phone or an iPad to look at things. So these photos, for example, they are less effective when they're printed on the wall as a normal photo than, for example, if you look at them on the iPad, because if you look at them on the iPad, you're looking from top, right? Which is more or less the point of view that I am showing with the drone. So, in fact, when I did an exhibition, the guy who curated the exhibition, he printed the photos with retro illuminated, and they were on the floor on different heights, but you had to lean on them to look at them. So, and those work very well. So you also have to try to think what the medium of consumption, let's say, of your image is, and so I don't know. For example, this is a mix, probably because I'm still in this work. I wanted to also look at the face and listen to the voice of the person who is the first victim of a minefield. But probably, as many people have told me, like just the minefield photos, they work together well, without including the objects, without including the single portraits. But I also come from a more classic photography approach, so I tend to probably include too many elements. But yeah, then I'll show you other things later. I don't know if I answered, but it's not really an answer. I was telling you, so anyway, you see, I was working on migration, but then I started working on landmines because someone gave me a piece of paper saying, oh, there are mines here, which scared me a lot. But then, and then when I was in Kosovo doing this work, I met one guy who was a young Kosovaran who he was 18 when Kosovo declared independence, and he was telling me almost 10 years later how most of the dreams of his generation had been caught in the web of political corruption, and how the country never really took off, how they hoped to be, in Europe. Instead, they were never granted a status that could allow them to travel, etc. So Kosovo is really this tiny pseudo-nation, let's say. I believe it's a nation, but not, it doesn't really have that status. So they cannot apply for, I want to travel to Italy. How do I do it? It's very difficult. And so, in the meantime, I also started working on Kosovo. The idea, as Alessandra was telling you, I belong to a collective, so it's 4 photographers. And we said, let's do this as a collective work. So we often do collective works, which means 4 of us work on the same topic or on the same area, geographical area. In this case, we work in 2017 and 18 to do more of a general portrait of the country, and see how some elements that collide with the sense of hope that 10 years before had driven the independence of this region. And this is a much more classic essay. This is another minefield. It's a political rally. Naturally, when you talk about a Balkan country like Kosovo, you have to talk about religious, ethnic tensions, etc. So we had to try to deal with that also. The majority of the people are Albanians, so Muslim, but there's also a Serb minority which is Christian Orthodox. And schools, for example, this is one school, are divided. Some schools are divided, so it means they have a wall which it's for kids that go, the Albanian kids and Serbian kids, and they don't cross, they don't see each other, even the playground is divided. Or there are only a few of these remaining. A school is used in the morning by the Albanians and in the evening by the Serbs. And so even the janitor is different. You have the morning janitor, which is the one for the Albanians, and the afternoon. And the dean's room has the red books are all like the textbooks for the Albanians, and the blue ones are for the Serbs. And actually the deans are different. So like these groups never even meet, either in space or in time. There's a separation. And this is the famous bridge that divides Mitrovica, which is, let's say, north is more the Serbs and south is the Albanian part of the country. And these are some of the kids that go to the same school, but it's some in the morning and some in the afternoon, but they're the same kids at the end. This is the coal mine which provides most electricity. It provides the coal for one electric power plant which provides most electricity in Kosovo, and it pollutes a lot because it's an old Yugoslavian era plant, but it's probably the only industry in the country. And this is like the first music band in Mitrovica, which has both Serb and Albanian players, and they play all over Europe. in some countries, in some cities in the Balkans, but they never played in Kosovo because they're not allowed to, or they're scared of being together. This is a madrasa at lunchtime. This is a training for, there's no army in Kosovo. There are a few countries that which have their own armies and provide peacekeeping. Bill Clinton. And this is the flag, but it's rarely used because mostly you use either the Serbian or the Albanian flag. And this flag had been imposed to the country. Okay. You have any questions?
You seem to have a variety of places you go and variety of approaches. It's because, of course, you work with a group of, you're a collective. But how much time do you dedicate to the research before actually going and shoot the pictures? Because this is something that it's very important, especially in big projects with a long breath and documentary breath.
Yeah, so, okay, the minefield project, for example, I would say in a project like this, you have to identify some partners in the field that can help you to gain access to the minefields. Partners, when I say partner, either it's a fixer, so a person that becomes your assistant in the field, speaks the language, etc. Or organizations which are based in the countries that you're going to visit, and they help you getting the permissions from the armies, from the companies, and finding the subjects for your portrait. So it takes a lot of organization and logistical time to prepare something like this. Kosovo, it's something that you build more in the field. So you might need more time in the field to shoot. Because there's a lot of people that we photograph, but those are mostly people that you encounter by walking around, by moving around. There's the first guy that is here. His name is Tony Blair. There are a few Tony Blairs and Bill Clintons in Kosovo, named after the two president and prime minister, because of the support that they gave to the Kosovar cause. But to find them, it was really difficult, naturally, because not everybody has the name. So in this case, it's all about being there, asking around, etc. So Kosovo, it took a couple of trips, and we are 4 photographers, so of maybe 2 weeks each to complete. So this is more of a classic approach where, maybe you have a base, you say that in the story, so we read a lot. We read before about the recent history of Kosovo, the relationship between ethnicities, the more recent political transformation. So we knew, for example, that in the story we wanted to talk about the parties, the contemporary rallies, but also the fact that the country is, has landmines. So there are some elements of the story that you decide beforehand, and in that case you you find the right person to contact, etc. But other elements that you include in the story as you go on. In general, what we say is that taking photos is the easiest part, and everything that comes before is more difficult because it's time consuming, but it's also interesting because only by reading you build your knowledge on the topic. This is not street photography, which is like impromptu. Oh, I see the light there breaking, in that window, and I'm taking that photo. No, like I'm building a story, and so it's essential to know what you're talking about. And this is our approach, at least. Then you might talk to other photographers, but I would say the majority of the documentary photographers will tell you this: that getting to know the topic, the subject, the area is important, and so reading before it's essential. I went back to Bosnia in 2018. I had an exhibition of the Landmines, and the NGO, which is Caritas, that organized the exhibition, told me, there is the new passage. There's a passage of refugees and migrants now through Bosnia, which never happened because it's like no one wants to go to Bosnia. It's a very poor country. They try to skip Bosnia and go to Croatia from Serbia. But because of the new policies that slowly have been put together by these countries, Bosnia became one of the few where, for example, you could fly from India or Pakistan directly without a visa, just with a tourist visa that you can get also on the spot. So they told me, you should go on the border between Bosnia and Croatia. That's where they're all stuck, because naturally you reach Bosnia, but then you're not able to move anymore. And so I went there. It's just a beginning of a story, so I'll show it to you. But it's something that I want to continue. So I was telling Alessandra, the next months I'm planning to go back and go to Albania, go into Hungary and Serbia, and maybe go back to Bosnia. And this, I had a very different visual approach, so more classic. I shoot in film, 6x6, because this also gives me much more time to think about what I'm doing. And so you see there's a back and forth between like more classic photography and drones, etc. And this is, I stayed there just a few days, so it's just the beginning. It's just a glimpse of what I would like to do, and maybe it's not even that interesting because it has been done by so many photographers. And while I was there, I started thinking of how to make it more interesting. So this is a former university dormitory which had been occupied in this little town, Kladuša, not too close to the border, but like in the vicinity of the border with Croatia. But totally, okay, it was, some food was given by the IOM, sorry, but the facilities was really bad. And then I started meeting these people who were showing me marks on their bodies that they had received by the Croatian police that were beating them before returning them to Bosnia, which is illegal because in theory, you have the right to go in front of a judge and say, I want to apply as an asylum seeker here in this country, and these are the reasons. You can't take a person and without asking anything, send them back to another country. And in this case, they were also beating them and breaking their phones and stealing their money, etc. And most of these people had stories of trying 10, 20, 30 times to cross the border, meeting the Croatian border police and being sent back. Some had also reached into Slovenia. Some, they say, they had reached almost or into Italy. And apparently also Italy is doing the same. So sending back to Slovenia, Slovenia to Croatia, and Croatia to Bosnia. This was accidental fall, but due to the fact that the police was running after him. Naturally, these are like UNHCR and these big organizations are recording these claims. They're very difficult to prove, so they don't really have a document showing that the police is brutally beating them, and so it's difficult to bring this up to a court. But when I went there to take this photo, which I took in another way. I'll show you later. Because let me start with this. What I'm doing now with the drone, in the direction of being more abstract, I'm working on the concept that hospitality as is intended, for example, in Italy, hospitalità, towards the refugees and migrants is when you provide a shelter. And usually this is done in formal camps, for example, the ones that I've seen on the borders. And these camps have the same identical look all over, naturally, and they have the same look of the camps which we have in some countries in Europe where migrants go and work. So seasonal laborers, they go to Calabria, they go to Puglia, so in southern Italy, but they also go to France and Spain. And every year in the summer to collect tomatoes or in the winter to collect oranges, and they congregate in these big informal camps. And so when I thought about this, I said, well, there is kind of a trend in like who enters these first hospitality camps around the border, for example, in Bosnia, and finally maybe after a few months he's able to enter Italy. Maybe some of them will end up in Calabria to collect tomatoes in a camp that looks the same, as if their lives go through a series of these very organized, if you look from top, camps, but you know they're missing sanitation, they're prone to violence, they're prone even to fires. It happened a week ago and it happened 2 months before in Rosarno in Calabria. A little stove burned the tent, and then the tent burned a few tents and some people have died. So what I'm doing now is collecting a few of these images of both formal, informal camps of first, like this is an informal camp on the border between Croatia and Bosnia. This one was built by the IOM with the European funds, but it was never opened. So they set up the camp, but according to the European Union, it is closer than 12 kilometers to the border, so it means that whoever stays here has the intention of crossing the border, and this is not the mandate of the IOM of helping, let's say, those who want to cross. So this clean and dry, nice thing was never employed. This is what remains of a portion of the informal camp in Calabria after a fire that destroyed most of the tents. And this is a formal camp organized by the Italian government in Calabria with the idea of closing this one. This one contains around 3,000 people, and this has around 500 seats. So naturally, if you build this, you know that not everybody will be able to fit. But you see, like, the idea is the same of creating a cluster of these tents without any social space, any area where you can maybe play football or whatever. And most importantly, it's something which is it's a ghetto, literally, in the sense that even if these tents are decent, it's isolated. It's away from the center of the town. It's you're not helping the integration. You are providing another ground of isolation, and this is exactly what is not working. And when we talk of Calabria, we're talking about something that has been happening for the last 10 years plus more than 10 years. So every season there are these people that come here. So it's not like a first emergency camp that you are putting there because you still have to figure out how to solve it. There's something that it became almost stable, no? Some people live in abandoned houses, and those who live there, you might think they're more lucky, but actually they don't even have electricity and running water. And so actually, who lives here, they were telling me, are those who they isolate themselves even more from their community. This was a group of 4 people from Mali. So this is a segregation in a very hard way. And here is the informal camp. Outside the formal camp on the island of Lesbos, the camp is called Moira, and this is the informal camp, and the pattern is the same. So this is the reflection that I've been working on. And while doing this, I've been debating whether to include other photos which are elements of passage of migrants. So for example, this is a boat which was used by some migrants to cross from Turkey into Lesbos, and this is another of these boats. And this is a detail of hundreds of thousands of life vests that have been used by migrants who cross from Turkey into Greece. And this is also in the invitations, like the dump site of Lesbos has this huge mound of these life vests. And this is a cemetery. The only, it's a small plot of land which a small community of Muslims gave for the dead bodies that are found of migrants, which are thought to be coming from Muslim countries. And some pits are open, which was to me pretty evocative in the sense that, it's not something that has been concluded. It's a movement and it's an issue which has been taking place. And this takes me, maybe we can go later back if you have questions about this. It takes me to the last project that I want to show you, which is Traces of Identity, which I did last year. So around 34,000 people have died in the last 10 years crossing trying to cross into Europe, either from the sea or from its external border, for example, rivers. And now that the Italian government and some European countries have changed their policies and made it much more difficult for boats to leave from Libya and try to cross into Italy. Some of these routes, for example, Bosnia, we saw it's becoming more popular, but also the Evros River. The Evros River is a river that divides Greece from Turkey, and so a lot of people are trying to cross into Greece from Turkey, just crossing this small river. Small in the sense it's not like a Mississippi. It's maybe the widest part is 20 meters, and it looks placid. But unfortunately, it's one of those boundaries that seem more easy to cross than they are actually. And every year in the last couple of years, around 20,000 people have crossed the river, and only last year in 2018, they recovered 33 bodies of migrants. And when they recover bodies, it means usually it's not that someone reports that someone is missing and you go and look for them. It's like by chance a fisherman or a policeman finds something and then they realize that something is a body that has been in the water for a long time. So most of these people are very difficult to identify. So there is a doctor in Greece that has been given the task of collecting these materials. So I photographed these objects, and the idea is to, so these objects that I photographed all belong to migrants, people who have not been identified yet. Some have been identified, but around 250 bodies have not been identified. And some really have just a few belongings. And the idea is that once a person from the family or a member of the family approaches the Greek police, they're able to say, we have a database of DNA. If it matches you, we'll give you back the objects of this person. And in some cases, they keep the bodies in the freezer for a few months, and so they are also able to return the bodies. But yeah, it's, again, we're talking about people who had left the country maybe years before. And most of the people die by drowning or hypothermia if they cross in the winter. And you are all wet, you have only a few minutes that you can be in the cold outside at night without starting to suffer from hypothermia. And if you don't change your wet clothes, this can lead to death. And Greece, although it's not in the list of the most mined countries, still has minefields on the border with Turkey. And some of these people have died by crossing into minefields because they're not very clearly demarcated, because they are in an army area. And so you're not supposed to be there. So anyway, these are some of these objects. For example, this is the only object that was found on this body. So to me, it represents a lot, naturally, of the whole story. Of these objects, we don't know anything. I personally have just a code, because for data and privacy, I'm not, the data of when the body was found and the sex are not relieved. But the doctor just, he provided some information for some of these objects. And actually, I wanted to present everyday objects, but with signs of time, of corrosion, because these objects have been in the water, in the mud, together with the bodies for months. These are teeth. Also, small things have been saved. Hoping that this could help. So this is a little label. This, for example, was retrieved from a woman. This is what the doctor told me. A woman from Africa. He didn't specify where. And she was inside her pants. She had a little pouch, leather pouch, with inside this envelope with two bits of soil, probably coming from her country, from her town. This is another pouch, so it's something that has been, it's used as a good luck. And most things are also, a lot of things you find are lists of numbers, contacts, persons that you're supposed to get in touch once you cross. this was a little bag of spices. Okay, so this is all. As you can see, like here, I changed totally my approach, and this was just pure still life. And this is also, it was also a way to try to give individuality to some everyday objects, which we don't know who they belong to, but they have a history, and the idea is also to create an archive, a visual archive, for those who are looking for their own relatives or friends. And it's not a new thing that I've done. Like there's a photographer from Bosnia, actually, Zijagavic, and he is working on mass graves, photographing the objects that I retrieved from there in a similar way. So anyway, today I presented a lot of things to you. Mainly, I wanted it to be a journey, because this is also for me. Like it's not always a linear path that you follow, and then both stylistically and although the theme that I feel the most passionate about naturally is migrants, but this can be treated in very different ways. Then, if you have questions, if you want to ask me anything, observations, or also like comments on how sorry, this was the last one. In fact, I thought this was. If you have any also comments on how effective you think this way is, please, Scott.
So, looking at these different series of images, I'm very much struck by how absence is an important element in understanding them. Here, the body or the person is absent from it. With the landmines as well, you see the person, but you don't see the mind that maimed them, and vice versa. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how you sort of handle this as a photographer, that what's in the frame and what's out of the frame, what you know is present, but that you want the viewer to come to through your photography.
Yeah. So. Just I don't know. Sometimes some topics are very interesting, but they're very difficult to depict. For example, if you want to talk about pollution, it's a very issue. But then, when you start practically thinking, oh, how am I going to talk about it? And then you have 5 different ways. You can find people who have diseases connected to pollution. You can find, like forests which suffer from acid rain, whatever. So you see, like, some topics really work around the absence of that element. So pollution is the subject, but you don't see it, and I find it fascinating somehow that you still try to document something that you don't really see, and you are a photographer. So I don't know, like this series, for example, on the bodies. I also wondered if I could talk about the body. And so there are some bodies are available to be photographed. And actually the guy thought that I was there for that. He told me, okay, I'll open the freezer now. So I told him, no. The doctor, he didn't speak very well English, so we communicated on the phone briefly, and he thought that I was there to photograph the bodies. So I told him, no, I came here just for the objects. But he insisted that I had to see the bodies, so he showed me some photos of how when the bodies are recovered. And naturally, that's the opposite. It's like, it's there. So sometimes when something is too evident, it becomes invisible in a way that we can perceive it. So removing the bodies from my photos and only putting the object, I think makes it more easy. And I don't know if it's stronger in the sense that it leaves more space for you to think about what happened to the person, who the person was. You will never know, but there's ground for imagination in the sense of merging more into the situation, and actually, I don't know, when I don't know if you noticed, some of the victims of the landmines, some were showing their legs like prostheses, and some didn't. And also that I question whether I should force them, let's say, or select only images where the prosthetic leg is visible, or instead, like a portrait of a normal person, like what apparently looks like a normal person, and then you say, yeah, but she lost a leg, and you don't know which leg probably. But that's something that you start thinking, So removing some information, I think, can be effective. This is something that a documentary photographer can do. Probably, if you are working for a newspaper, if you're trying to get one single strong image, probably this is not the way. Probably you have to show something strong because you have that only chance to get the viewer to immerse in the situation. But like if you have the possibility, because you publish 10 photos or you have an exhibition, so you have more attention span from the viewer. So in that case, you can work with the absence and make it strong. I don't know, this is...
So like, are you using these photos for like awareness and putting them in conversation with like tangible kind of social change in terms of like a message to, connect with like organizations like that?
Yeah, so I try to get, to give as much space to my work as possible, which means that, okay, the first more natural platform is through the media. So I've been working for the last 12 years as a photojournalist, so I have a network of photo editors, magazines. For example, this work, Traces, was published in December or January on the New York Times Lens. And interesting, most paper magazine, old paper magazine told me, it's interesting, but we don't want to talk about migrations anymore. Which is something crazy in the sense that if something is happening, you should talk about it. But that's how now we are oversaturated by this topic. It became more political than, it became a very controversial political issue, more than like a real emergency, a humanitarian emergency. Only NGOs talk about humanitarian emergency. If you look at the media, usually it's a political debate, right? And this shift made it an off topic. Naturally, the New York Times Lens, they published the work, they had an interview, and they tried to give space to what I wanted to talk, in the sense that it's still important to find ways to bring up and bring out this subject. And by making still lifes, I thought that it could be a different way to approach the same topic. But for example, the landmines that I use for publications, maybe tomorrow, whoever will be with you, I can show you some of the publications, whoever will be at the workshop. It also, it's a traveling exhibition which was in Bosnia at the beginning of the year, of last year, and then now it's traveling through Italy. So I'm trying, the different ways that you can show your work, and the media is the most common one, but naturally you also, for example, the photo of the landmines are also provided for a report on landmines by this NGO that supported me while I was there, which is another way that you can work on lately becoming more popular. So working with NGOs and they help you, and then you provide the material to them.
Okay, so for me, oh my God, I cannot do that. For me, the most effective part of your presentation, I don't remember, I think it was like the second collection of photos when you talked about families that were migrating and you told the stories of the objects. I can be wrong, but like it seemed to me like you could actually remember the emotions like the people were experiencing and you were experiencing when you were listening to their stories. This was really precious to me, and I wanted to ask you, like, how were you able to connect with these people? Because like the stories are really intimate, and like how much time did you spend with people, and like do you have like, I don't know.
So you are talking about this, right?
Yeah, and like certain ways of, I don't know.
Yeah. Well, anyway, you saw why I showed you this set of photos, because I find them very naive. Also, I didn't devote much time and thought to this series, but it was the kind of an idea that then, a few ideas that then I brought up later. So this of the still life, for example. So for example, these still lifes were done without any light, but maybe, as you say, the whole story works. But you know, like life in a camp is super boring. So whoever wants to listen to some stories, you have plenty of people who are willing to talk to you. These were families who were stuck there and they had no idea how to go on, and so I would just talk to, unfortunately, only to the ones that had some members speaking English, but usually the young ones spoke, and then I could convey, explain my topic, and actually they were very happy to share all their stories and objects. So yeah, actually this is what at the end, photography for me, it's also experiencing meeting people, because when you travel, you're not traveling to a country, you're traveling to meet people, right? Like you're not going to Germany, you're going to meet Germans. And here is the same, like, so I think the relationship that you can build with a human being is the most valuable, let's say. And that's what keeps me debating on how much aerial photography I will keep doing it. In the sense that, yeah, I want to complete some of my projects, but it's very much detached from the subjects of the story. So it can work sometimes, but yeah, what I feel the most about is like talking to and gaining the privilege of getting access to a glimpse of the life of some of the people. And actually, I'm still in touch with this family here. They were relocated in Greece after, because they were living really in the forest in the middle of nowhere. Who was in the forest was in touch with the traffickers, try to cross, but then it rarely happened. Especially if you have kids, it was really difficult. Then they were relocated in a town, so away from the border with no hope to cross. But then this Spanish family, group of friends actually, they got interested. I don't know how they met them, but the same way probably that I met them, by being there. And then they found a job for the husband, and then after like 2 years, now they're living in Spain. So it's a nice story.
My question is, how do you avoid objectifying and appropriating the suffering of these migrants? As in, like, what are you providing for the migrants as a whole in exchange for the photographs that you're taking of them, especially when it comes to such non-subjective photographs?
I don't provide anything specific apart from explaining my project, and so which makes let's say the process a little more lengthy. So also when I took these photos, naturally not all of them, I couldn't talk to all of them, but I was here, let's say, okay, which meant that they all knew that I was in the scene, and actually most of the times I would, because this was a big group of people, for example, that had been in line for a while, so I would talk to them and tell them, I'm going to take some photos from top. Who doesn't want to look up? Don't look up. I never found any issues, like I never heard of someone saying, please don't do it. Actually, the only ones who didn't like, naturally, were the policemen, all these things. But most, and you saw also some of the smiles. Actually, these photos, okay, you won't see well. These photos have been presented as in an exhibition which also traveled, and I print them huge. Like huge means 2.5 meters by 1.5 meters, because you have the ability to look at them from a distance, and so you have the general view, but also you can approach and look at the faces of the people. No? So, and most of the, for example, in this case, which was probably a little more dramatic in the sense that there were people moving, tired, etc., I found very positive attitude towards my presence, because although I was using this very cold and mechanical object, but probably because also it was in a situation where people were moving, and so they were happy, let's say, because the borders were open. No? Here I was able to, this is one of the many, naturally, here I was able to talk to all of them, explain what I was doing. So what I try to give back is a coherence in my work. I'm not saying, I'm taking these photos because tomorrow, I'll save you. No, I'm saying, I'm doing this, and is it fine for you? Without promising anything, without giving any false hopes. And if actually some might look for some help, which then you can either direct them to someone who can help them, or just explain, I don't know anything I don't know what it can happen. Like I met this woman, she had like 5 kids, and she's like, my husband is in Germany, I'm stuck here, what can I do, help me? I'm like, I don't know, like, so the only thing I could do is putting her in touch with the NGO, with Doctors Without Borders, etc. You try to be part of the big machine of help and support, but yeah, I try. My advice is always not to sell too much of what you're not able to give, and be honest. That's the only thing.
Does that also apply to the photographs of the objects left by the deceased migrants? Would you say, or do you find that to be like a different from your perspective?
So ideally, as I was telling you, because this guy who photographed, so this project is not totally finished in the sense that initially there is another team of doctors that do identification of victims of migrants who drowned in a couple of big accidents off the Italian coast. And so my idea is to carry on the same documentation with those objects and then create a page which could be a kind of directory of, but you can do as much as you want in efforts, but then you also have to find, for example, ways that people know that you have that directory of objects, right? So the best way would be to interact with a big organization, for example, UNHCR or IOM. These are the ones that have the missing migrant projects, etc. And then you collide a little bit with their agenda, and this project was supposed to be done in collaboration with UNHCR, and after 6 months that they completely stagnated, I decided to do it by myself. So ideally, yeah, this could be something that could give back at least a list of objects to those who are looking for. And this maybe social media can help. Eventually, yeah. First I want to finish it, and then it could become something like that.
Hi, thank you very much. Remembering what you just said, that there is a political discourse around this problem of this question of migration, which is an emergency discourse when it comes to NGOs. In between these, I just wanted to ask if you feel that your work actually speaks about the people rather than the political or the emergency discourse, and if it can help create an archive of memory which is alternative to the institutional memories that is going to be transmitted of this huge phenomenon which is this migration flow. Because the memory that is sheltered in an archive is certainly going to be different from the memories that you bring out. So I wanted to know how you feel about these in-betweens. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thanks. It's true that NGOs have their own strong agenda, which is sometimes to over-dramatize, or not over-dramatize, but maybe to provide one view and one look at a situation, forgetting, for example, the everyday life of or some case of those cases, for example, that work out fine, for example, and the political discourse is completely different. So I think it's important to have, and there are many photojournalists that keep working on this topic, because they have, I'm not saying objective because that doesn't exist, but it's something in between view. Although what I find, as I was telling you, it's more difficult to find a platform where you can share with an audience your work. And that's a problem in the sense that I know a lot of good material which is around there, done by photographers who maybe are less well known or have a smaller network, and they're not able to publish it. So it's a constant debate on how much you do it for yourself, let's say, and how much you're able to share. Sometimes, I'm not much of a social channel like Facebook things, but it's true that at least you have a way to open a debate also with friends or close friends when you share your work among your peers, let's say, in an even smaller circle, and it's a bit that can help. So, or can help in the sense can keep the attention even of a smaller group, because at the end I might also publish my work on some magazines, but the longevity of that work on that magazine is still very brief. Somehow what goes on the internet has a longer life, but it's mixed in a huge cauldron of like anything. So yeah, it's a constant thinking of how to get your work visible, and and something that whoever of you will keep working in photography or media, etc., it's would be challenging, but also it makes it interesting because it forces you to continuously think and rethink how and what to talk about, which is something probably that up to 20 years ago was less like classic photojournalism was classic photojournalism, and you had those magazines, and that was the way. There was not much more, you know. So now it's a richer platform, but more challenging for sure.
I want to thank you, Rocco, for this wonderful evening, and we'll continue the conversation tomorrow with our group. And thanks again for coming.
Thank you.